Chapter 1. The search for meaning in suffering can result in a stronger mind. The first stage of imprisonment manifests itself as shock. Upon incarceration, many inmates face the frightening feeling of a new, cruel reality. As was common with inmates at concentration camps, the newbies were forced to cope with being snatched from normalcy and cast into a hell-like existence. Keep in mind, the first few weeks of being an inmate are confusing because you're still struggling to reconcile your past and present realities. Shock gave way to apathy, a total disregard for emotion. Since the paramount desire of the prisoner was to protect their inner self, apathy was essential to prevent them from bothering about anyone but themselves. The author suggests that as the exterior hardens and dulls, we can feel stronger on the inside. While the inmates' bodies deteriorated at the Nazi concentration camps, their minds and souls became stronger, and a connection to the powers beyond the physical world heightened in this condition. The prisoners coped with their misfortunes by developing vivid dreams of the future, visualizing a cessation of their suffering. There was no need for trivial desires for anything that didn't ensure the prisoner's survival. As such, there was a drastic dip in libido among the inmates. They didn't care for much, except politics and religion, with religion as first and foremost. As it would seem, our spirit grows stronger as we search for meaning during hard times. So, those with a strong spirit could withstand even the worst physical torture. Viktor Frankl also claimed that love was a key component in the will to survive. Simply knowing that you have someone to live for makes it easier to survive in a tough situation. Suffering may be deathly, but love is as strong as death. In the face of trials and death, love keeps the mind alive. The memory about a loved one is enough to keep it together. It was also helping to have memories of the easier times. An incarcerated person's mind replays fond memories and keeps him in a state of blissful reminiscence as a form of relief. It can also become more attuned to art, beauty, and nature, or even heighten the prisoner's sense of humor. Man's Search for Meaning chronicles author Viktor Frankl's experiences as a prisoner in Nazi concentration camps during the Second World War. Frankl learned a lot about survival through his experience and those of the inmates he keenly observed. You may not ever be in a concentration camp, but suffering is an unavoidable part of life. Frankl took notes of the traits and beliefs that made some inmates survive the harsh conditions and others couldn't withstand. And after leaving the camp, he taught others these principles. Now it's your turn to learn them. This summary will show you what to do in an emotional crisis and how to find meaning even in pain. Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. Viktor E. Frankl. Key point 2. There is no amount of suffering that we cannot overcome. The theory that man can survive anything was tested and proven in Nazi concentration camps, where people had to endure what can only be described as hell on earth. Although all went through the same ordeal, some survived to tell the story. One can survive anything by putting their mind to it, even a concentration camp. But in this dire reality, you start to notice that there's clarity of mind, and the littlest things can bring you profound joy. These seemingly simple things made it easier for the mind to process relief. Merely knowing that you might get 2 slices of bread instead of 1 made a world of difference to the inmates at death camps. Finding little joy amid suffering is key to survival. It keeps us grateful. Regardless of their situation, people can change or stay steadfast in their original design. Most prisoners resorted to despicable survival methods and blamed it on their surroundings. But a person's right to choose who they are and who they want to be in the face of trouble can't be taken from them. As imprisoned individuals search for meaning in their situation, they must see it as an opportunity to obtain fulfillment and find a purpose, because life cannot be complete without suffering. In their desire to survive, they shouldn't lose humanity. The tactics we employ to survive must not be at the cost of our true nature. The most trying part of the imprisonment for Viktor Frankl was when he didn't know for how long he'd be locked up. This unknown usually caused many people in concentration camps to give up and simply waste away, because they couldn't imagine a future beyond their lives behind barbed wire fences. Suffering loses its effect once you understand it and can make sense of it. Once you do, you free up space for faith in the future and strengthen your spiritual and mental truths. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Viktor Frankl. Chapter 3. We search for meaning all the time, longing for something other than the reality we were born into. Humans cannot live without meaning since it is a primary motivation, a form of instinctive longing for something beyond reality that controls everything. It is argued that meaning is an arbitrary concept conjured in the form of a defense mechanism, but it goes beyond rationale into a more profound conviction that one can live or die for their ideals and values. A person can face frustration trying to exercise their right to define their meaning. This conflict, called existential frustration, occurs when one encounters great difficulty finding meaning for their existence and the will to define their life's purpose. Sometimes, as we try to find meaning in our lives, it can do more harm than good, causing inner tension. But this conflict is necessary for a person to survive, resulting in neurogenic neuroses. Nous is Greek for the mind, which refers to the mind's great distress as it tries and fails to find the meaning of existence. Accepting the tension that keeps one searching for a new meaning is called new dynamics and is applicable for everyone. The feeling of discontent and the desire to improve what we have accomplished works positively, since that's how we manifest our will to meaning. Keep in mind, we will only agree to a mediocre life if we live it without tension. The pressure of existential frustration acts as a catalyst for change. However, people often suffer from a constant feeling of meaninglessness, termed the existential vacuum. This sense of isolation, inherent to the modern generation, is caused by the emptiness of a meaningless existence that leaves a deep feeling of boredom, causing aggression, depression, and addiction, which often culminate in suicide. In these times of mental distress, logotherapy, the psychoanalytic treatment that employs a search for logos or meaning, can help. It can fill the vacuum with a definite purpose and prevent a relapse into destructive habits. Did you know? Jewish people were excluded from public life on September 15, 1935, when the Nuremberg Laws were issued. These laws also stripped German Jews of citizenship and the right to marry Germans. Chapter 4. Life's meaning is different for each of us. Life means different things to different people. There's no definite or abstract meaning for life, only a relative, ever-changing one. Thus, we can only define life's purpose in a given time, situation, or person. So don't ask, what is life? But instead, what is life for me? Logotherapy hands patients the awareness of their role in defining their existence. A logotherapist must help the patient see their life more clearly. A patient can find meaning in one of three ways: performing an action that distracts them from the pain and makes them feel fulfilled, experiencing something meaningful or interacting with someone whose company they enjoy, or developing a positive attitude toward unavoidable suffering. A patient can find meaning when acting on or experiencing culture and nature, or interacting with someone by loving them. Love is the one way to encounter another person's core and know their true being. It makes it possible to see a person's traits and potential and help them unleash them. In logotherapy, love isn't merely sex, but the primary instinct from which the desire to have sex is born. And as such, sex is merely one of the many ways of expressing love. Remember, love encourages full disclosure. If you wish to find meaning in your life, love yourself first. The third way of finding meaning is to suffer. Suffering in itself is a form of life, and as such has its meaning. One can seek meaning from this state, but suffering is not necessary for meaning. Is there an ultimate meaning then? Yes, logotherapy seeks to identify this one super meaning, regardless of the person's religious standpoint, not by trying to draw it from the patient's belief system, but rather by giving them meaning within their belief system that ultimately explains their lives. Chapter 5. Logotherapy is a technique in psychotherapy that combats everyday difficulties. We've had brief mentions of logotherapy in contrast to psychotherapy, but here we'll go a little deeper into the details of the technique and what it aims to achieve. Logotherapy has developed a special technique to help individuals face everyday difficulties like fear. It finds a starting point common in neurotic patients, anticipatory anxiety, that makes the sufferer fear something that may happen in the future. This is termed hyperintention and has a similar condition known as hyperattention, which can lead to sickness. A patient pays undue attention to a condition, and its symptoms get inflicted by it. Remember, the fear that something might happen can cause it to happen. The technique, paradoxical intention, helps fix such a condition. It aims to rid one of the anticipatory fears by engaging a patient in thoughts that can cause the intended effects. For example, if you're scared of sweating in public, you should think, I should sweat even more this time. The logic is that you reverse your attitude toward the problem, perceiving it as a challenge. Don't forget, reverse psychology can force the body to negate the anxiety prompts in your head. As logotherapy seeks to combat neurosis, it first approaches it in relation to the age of the sufferers. For most, a neurosis is a form of nihilism, the belief that man is nothing but the result of biological, psychological, and sociological conditions, or the product of heredity and environment. This feeling of nothingness isn't any different from the existential vacuum from earlier. Logotherapy states with certainty that man indeed is nothing but a finite being that isn't just a product of an environment, but the one in charge of what the environment makes of him. Chapter 6. Optimism helps us make sense of the senseless sufferings. Man can always determine his nature in the face of any situation because there exists no condition that can completely rid him of freedom. Thus, even in a neurotic state, the patient has a residue of freedom to decide to be cured or stay in this condition. Keep in mind, our thoughts reflected in our bodily reactions profoundly influence us. We all have the power to choose our responses, even in the face of extreme difficulties. A person can seek refuge in love or a higher appreciation for the life he once had before the suffering. The author believes that one possesses pan-determinism. No matter what, one can rise to challenge the situation and not be trodden down by it. This approach to life is known as tragic optimism, believing that there is some good in seemingly hopeless situations. In logotherapy, tragic optimism seeks to turn suffering into a human achievement, use guilt to better oneself, draw incentive from life's transitory nature. This state can't be forced, hyperintention, since we need a reason to feel emotions. Don't forget, tragic optimism is the search for meaning during hard times, and it can lead to a positive outcome and create a deeper sense of purpose in people. One can learn to be tragically optimistic if one can tell oneself to find the greater meaning in one's suffering, not give up, or turn to immediate pleasure, drugs, sex, and even crime. The logotherapist must help a patient find their remaining part and reinvigorate it, replacing the void that eats away the soul. Conclusion. We are confronted with unpleasant moments in our lives daily, or for some like the prisoners of Auschwitz, we live a life of suffering. How we react to these circumstances is entirely up to us. No matter how dire, a situation cannot change who you are and will be. So you must seek the meaning of this life yourself and make peace with it now. Envision a future for yourself beyond suffering. A life devoid of meaning or desire for a future will make you burn out soon. The inmates of concentration camps were subjected to the worst conditions possible. Some made it out with their souls and minds intact and remained good people because instead of letting the situation define their lives, they sought meaning and answers to the questions life gave them. We cannot exist without meaning, and we'll spend our lives searching for it. It is important that we don't get trapped in the cycle of distress associated with the existential crisis we face. The trick is to realize that there's no fixed meaning to life, so you should create this meaning for yourself. You are the captain of your ship. Don't perceive suffering as an unnecessary part of life because pain helps us grow. However, aggravating events test our personalities since we face the choice to stay kind or do bad things to avenge the circumstances. Remember that we always have the freedom to choose how to behave. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Viktor E. Frankl. Try this. Tragedies are normal parts of life, and we will all have our fair share of them. But we can learn to respond in positive ways, like practicing tragic optimism. When faced with challenging and painful life situations, tragic optimism is all about finding hope and meaning. Another related tragedy for surviving pain is holding on to your closest and most meaningful relationships.